at the psychoanalytic talk, and I wanted to talk about the differences in phenomenology of autistic people and schizoid people. So here I'm gonna separate both groups, but please note that they're not necessarily that separate, as studies have shown that the most linked personality disorder with people who have autistic traits is schizoid. So clinically both can be together, they can be merged. So here I'm separating them, but it's kind of artificial. It's to make my point across in order to understand better both subjectivities and lived experiences of both groups. So do what you must and take what you must from this video. And also I wanted to share that this is not like exact knowledge. It's more my point of view as a practicing psychologist. That's sharing my point of view. So I'm not going to use the DSM or the ICD to show what symptomatic difference might be or might not be from one or the other. It's more about a free flow of me trying to share what I've understood from both groups of people throughout the years. So fundamentally, this is not science, this is quasi-philosophy, because I'm going to be talking about phenomenology, i.e. the study of lived experience of those people, both groups, and the differences in which both groups have, or even similarities that they might share. So let's start with autistic people. Autistic people are often people that seek contact, but somehow are prevented by it, or because of their innate differences, or because social cues are not necessarily easy, or because they might take things a bit too literally. So in these cases, these people deep down completely want to have a contact. Like if you gave them the option, and often if you ask them, what's easier, being alone or being with the people? They will tell you, no, what's best is being with people, nice people. I want to be with nice people. So there's no real tendency to try and isolate. It's quite the contrary. They're trying to make contact as best they can with the tools they have, trying to understand others, and fundamentally being very subjectively keen on trying to get those relationships. However, they might appear as odd to other people. That oddness might be the result of the fact that they don't exactly know what to say, when to say it, or sometimes when they're very young, like teenagehood or early adulthood, might not know exactly which partitions of music to play in a social setting, because fundamentally there is a role that is expected of individuals. So they might try and sing along but have false notes, and neurotypical people are very quick to pick up on those false notes and think that something's off, odd, or bizarre. It's not because the person is bizarre, it's just because they're trying very hard to do something, but they're not really succeeding at it, because they're incarnating something that they're not. They're trying to show a persona. It's often in that community considered masking, i.e. putting a face on. So I use the Jungian concept because I feel very comfortable with that concept, but it has many other names. The idea fundamentally here is that they're often trying to play a role which doesn't suit them, but they think that might suit others. Often in their subjectivity, they might feel very isolated, very lonely, and very depressed, because they just don't understand why they're not connecting in an easy way. And sometimes they can put the fault onto themselves when it's not their fault. It's because they're different and they're not necessarily completely aware of the differences. Of course, here when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about people who are on the high end of the spectrum. People who used to be referred as Asperger's syndrome and high-level functional autistic people. So here I'm just laying the ground, and I consider all autistics to be kind of on a similar playing field. It's just that there is some that are here and some that are there, but it's very all-encompassing, right? But anyway, so fundamentally there is a real tendency for autistic people to want to reach out. It's just that they don't really know how to. And often they might not even see the telltale signs of abuse, because fundamentally when they start getting accepted by someone else, they might feel that that relationship is to preserve at all costs. In a way, if we were to use Fernburn's model, it's about how conserving the relationship, being in the having that exciting object that finally accepts them and trying to preserve them at all costs, reactivating what Fernburn called the libidinal ego, meaning that the person is going to sacrifice themselves in order to keep that relationship, thinking that that relationship is the best that they can have, or that they're going to get. Often the fact of being neurodivergent, and not realizing it can be something that's works against them, as they are trying very hard to adapt, but something is amiss in the adaptation, because then they're not supposed to adapt like that, or to play the role of someone they're not. They're supposed to be a connection, a real emotional connection, and they're trying to do it through an alternate way, which often results in a lot of suffering, because they're becoming someone they're not. And that suffering is something that they would like to do without. And I think that that's something that's very, very interesting, as the subjectivity of autistic people is very focused inwards, a bit like the schizoid. But here it's about trying to make every relationship work within, and then trying to make it work without. And it's something that I find very interesting, as autistic people often feel the emotions of others in a very deep way, but are not necessarily gonna show it, but they're gonna try and reach out, but that reaching out might be not exactly what the other person is expecting, or something in which the other person, not the autistic person, but the other person is not quite ready to accept it. And in those cases, the autistic person might go too fast, or be too quick to offer an answer that the other person is not quite there yet to get the answer, so it might cause rejection. Often autistic people are very sensitive to rejection and really, really hope that that won't happen, and they have that hope that's very important within their minds, that if I do this I won't get rejected, or if I do that, and they often create a whole bunch of scenarios in which all of this happens, and then they will have, in a way, the magic ticket to acceptance from others and happiness. And often the fact of understanding or realizing that they're autistic is very, very helpful, as they understand that, in a way, masking is an option that then becomes put at a distance. It's as if they realize that what they were doing is playing a role, and that moment where they realize that they're playing a role is often a very important one, as they fundamentally understand that they're not that, and that they can be with others and have good relationships with others, but not by doing that, but by being them. So it might seem a bit cookie cutter, but that's how really it is. Like, if you've played a role all your life, a character, and you realize that that character is not you, that realization is so transformative that often the whole framework of your life changes, because you understand that you don't have to do it. You can be who you are deep down without having to always adapt, and just to stay in your inner world. So that's pretty much how autistics experience their subjectivity at their core within relationships. I also want to note, before we go to the schizoid version of this, that autistic people often have a very rich internal world. That's something that intertwines with schizoids. But they often tend to have this will to make that internal world something external, that they're trying to transform it in order to make it happen in the outside world. And often the fact of not making that inner world happen is what can be a source of suffering for them. And that's something that I feel is very notable. Also here, I just want to pull parentheses just to say that what I'm saying here is not the truth. It's my perspective on the subjectivity of people. So I might be not quite right, or I might not hit all the notes properly, and that's okay. And I don't want you to think that this is the truth. This is my perspective. So moving on to the schizoid adaptations, as Greenberg would say. Fundamentally, the schizoids are very different, as if you gave them the option to be with people, they wouldn't necessarily take it. Or if they took it, they would be masking, but they know very well that they're masking. There is something far more detached in the schizoid personality, in which it seems to me that the schizoid phenomenology is like a philosophy of life in a way, perhaps in a very peculiar way, but in a way nonetheless, that there is this inherent suspiciousness towards the world, not in any paranoid way, right? It's not about paranoia. It's more like the fundamental core element of, can I trust you? That's asked in schizoidness, whereas autism, not that much. Autistic people can be very trusting, whereas schizoid people are not so much, and you're really gonna have to build that trust. It's not given, it's built for schizoid people. They also feel that schizoid people understand very thoroughly what's happening, like the cues, the social events, the envy, the jealousy, all the negative stuff is picked up by schizoids. They understand it. And they might withdraw at those moments, but they're not withdrawing because they necessarily directly hurt, but because they feel that they will be hurt at some point. They also might feel much more prone to despair, that in a way no one can understand them. So in a way their subjectivity is much more linked to what Guntrip theorized as a regressed ego, meaning that where the autistic person really is seeking a relationship very, very thoroughly, very intensely, and even on a conscious level, a schizoid is going to withdraw within himself or herself and going to avoid the relationship and even try and create his inner world, in which the inner world here in this case isn't going to be externalized, meaning the schizoid is not going to try and make it a reality. He's going to try and live within his inner world, whereas the autistic tries to make it happen in a way, whereas the schizoid stays within. And that staying within is something that's going to be paramount, as the therapeutic work here is going to be very different. It's about trying to create an environment in which the schizoid is going to be able to leave the regressed ego to become someone that's more fluid with the relationship. And in those manners, they're very different. There is something in which the schizoid is very well aware of the mask he's putting on, and the mask is a mechanism to survive. It's to survive the relationship, whereas the autistic person does it to gain the relationship, and to maintain it, of course. And often schizoids, at least what I have seen, is that schizoids are very good at picking up people that want to hurt them or want to exploit them. Like, they're very thorough, they see the intent behind it, which is sometimes very different from autistic people that don't always see it, or they might overgo the red flag because they want to be in a relationship so very much. And that means that the schizoid doesn't necessarily have to learn that in the hard way, because often there's been a lot of trauma in the schizoid experience, meaning that they understand the dark side, so to speak, of mankind, whereas autistic people can understand it very well intellectually, but emotionally they might be very, very prone to giving to others something directly, something that's very innocent and pure, whereas the schizoid is going to be very protective of that innocence and of what he has and his identity. There's also something perhaps more fundamental, is that in autistic people there is something of how can I say, it's gonna be said strangely, but overflowing core, right? Where the autistic person is very, very aware of his identity or her identity, and and it's very much there. The schizoid, on the other hand, is going to have something closer to the empty core, something that's an identity that's harder to really seize or grasp, something that's more nebulous because they have so much protection that in themselves, that their inner world is so important that it has layers in which it's hard to go beyond those layers. The whole point of Fernbend, for example, with schizoid people is to try and create a good environment that's good enough for the schizoid to be able to let go of his inner world and be more able to participate in the external world. And in the schizoid, I'm not going to say it's a choice because it isn't a choice, but there is that awareness of the difference, and they're very, very aware, but they don't necessarily want to partake in the group. And the group is dangerous, or at least that had the potential to be dangerous, whereas the autistic really wants to be part of it. And fundamentally, here we have things that is very interesting enough, on the surface might be quite similar, but at the very core are very different. And also in terms of emotions, some autistic people can be hypersensitive or hyposensitive, meaning not too sensitive. But in a way, the autistic people can often pinpoint their emotions, whereas schizoid people sometimes can't, and it becomes nebulous when they try and understand or try and reach out into themselves, reach in to try and put the emotions and share them with other people. Often they can feel like frozen or unable to, as if they were locked in. Whereas the autistic people, I feel, don't have necessarily that much problems sharing. At least a good bunch of them can share their emotions quite easily with the clinician. So fundamentally, both groups can be, as I said at the start of this video, both groups can intertwine. So I mean, a difference is more or less heuristic, meaning it's I do it, but it's not necessarily accurate. Like you can have people that are schizoid and autistic, and have people that are autistic but absolutely not schizoid, and so on and so forth. The breaking down of it is infinite, and I don't want you to take away from this video like a perfect understanding, a perfect bunch of symptoms, because it's not that. What I was trying to do here in this video was to share my perspective and my insights on the topic. That doesn't mean that my insights are the be-all and end-all of this discussion. Quite the opposite. I think it's only the beginning of a wonderful discussion. And what is important to me is for my video to be able to spark your creativity and your insights, because that's what's important here. It's not me giving you the truth, it's you being able to make something of this video, if you want to, of course, and be able to come to your own conclusions. That's what's really important. So that pretty much sums it up for this video. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask, or if you have something to add, just feel free. I mean, I want this channel to be as welcoming as possible for everyone. So please feel free to just leave a comment, or even just message me if need be. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one.